People back then, I think, living in shophouses, we were a lot closer than what it is today, now living in an apartment.
Shophouse is very versatile, it's very flexible. So it's possible to reprogram this architectural typology into anything.
Coming back to something so uniquely Singaporean with Islamic rain eaves, Corinthian pillars, and even like dotted with Peranakan tiles. To me, you can't find anywhere else in the world.
Singapore's unique characteristic as a city is made up of the shophouse areas. We don't have mountains, we don't have the Taj Mahal, we don't have Angkor Wat, but we have very unique streets that are very intimate, very cozy, and very diverse in their architectural styles.
Geylang is a melting pot for food, and we find food from different cuisines, cooking styles from different countries. And I think that reflects the diversity of the community as well.
I like to stay in Geylang because there are so many temples and also the other religions like Hindu temples and mosques.
We love Geylang because it's really a very vibrant place. You can have 6 shopping malls within walking distance. The hair salon here, they open till past midnight.
My name is Karen. I run Pocket Projects, which is a creative development consultancy. We specialize in the adaptive reuse of old buildings. In layman speak, is that we take old forgotten buildings and breathe a new lease of life into them and turn them into something cool and creative that's also commercially viable. One of the projects that we've done is called the Lorong 24A Shophouse series. And it is a row of 8 shophouses in Geylang on Lorong 24A. When we first came upon the project, the owners had a plan to actually knock all the rear bits together and build a slab block, turn it into a hotel, I think. But at the time, the market conditions were not very conducive for such a large project, and they were looking at, what other options they had to do something else. It was a bit like an experiment. So you've got 8 different shophouses. Largely from the outside, they look pretty much the same with subtle differences. But the idea was that inside, you would basically enter quite a different world in each one.
I was still an apprentice back then, but I was told that we were going to design a decent lap pool within the shophouse. And of course, there were the other requirements that you have bedrooms, kitchen, and a kind of adequate living space for a house. I was in disbelief at first. One of the things that in real estate you wouldn't want to be, especially in shophouse, you're going to give up quite a lot of space for something that may not be as beneficial as a usable space. So what we did for this shophouse was to insert this pool, expressing the entire linearity of the space. So drawing viewers from front all the way to the back. So at the back of the space, you have this very tall window that kind of exaggerates this expansion of space. For this shophouse, we consciously tried to express what was old and what is new in terms of design language and how materials applied. If you go up to the upper levels, we don't want to merge the old and the new. It's something that we consciously tried to do in the project. We wanted to pay respect to the old. What's in the past will stay as it is, and we can consciously try to preserve. So our take on this project was to preserve that space. Because I think when we start to talk about conservation, we necessarily have to insert something new. If you look back at the history of how shophouses are occupied, during the early days, the coolies occupying shophouses, you have large community existing within a shophouse, then it transits into more nuclear kind of based families occupying shophouse. So as it transits, you realize shophouse as a typology is very adaptable.
You know, shophouses have always had a dual life, right? I mean, if you think back to what they were when they were first made, it was a shop on the lower floor and then it was a house above so that people could, you know, run their little business and then go upstairs to go back to normal life. It's kind of embedded already in the shophouse type. One of the things that we were asked to include actually was to make this shophouse a space for art. The idea being that people who really liked art would come and live here. You know, this idea of, you know, art and yet a home. And so we thought, well, why not make a gallery house? And we call it Gallery House because this has two addresses. So the front is the house, and the back really was the main gallery space, and it has its own entrance off the back alley. That is the contemporary face of the house, the gallery face of the house. It's fun because if you look at these shophouses from the front, from the lorong side, you will see that they all look pretty uniform, maybe slightly different colors because they all follow the conservation guidelines. But from the back, we were allowed to be completely contemporary. So you can see here in the row, all the different houses have totally different expression. We realized that we could play with certain elements in this project to give it that sculptural quality. We thought, well, why not make the staircase into a piece of sculpture within this light well? So light wells are a common element in all shophouses. And in so doing, it would kind of twist and contort and itself have a very muscular sculptural quality that could be seen even if we used very simple materials. People who came into this building to always be aware of what is new versus what is old, and what is gallery versus what is house. Not this, you know, very stark sort of, you know, line of divide, but there is this conversation that the house is having. At the end of every conservation project, there's an officer from the URA Conservation Department who has to come and inspect. As he was leaving, he gave us an amazing compliment. He said, you know, you really kept the feeling of this place, of this conservation shophouse, even though it's a very contemporary take on it. You know, to us, that was the ultimate compliment because it's about how to create a feeling rather than just going by the book and ticking off the checklist.
So for conservation in Singapore for URA, we look at the facade, we look at the structure, we also look at the traditional building materials and the internal arrangement because they all come together to give you an understanding of how our pioneers or our ancestors built and lived. And it also gives us an idea about how old buildings, before the era of air conditioning, designed for comfort.
It was all about how can we engage to actually experience shophouses in a different way. It was therefore about creating a collection, and architecturally it was about, you know, exploring what you could do with the typical shophouse form. I think what's exciting for people who come and see the collection is that they have an opinion. I mean, they have a reaction. I like this one better than the other. So there is that natural engagement that the project allows with people. And you don't have to be knowledgeable about architecture to have a reaction, to like it or dislike it. And that's the whole point of this project. It's just to make it all a lot more accessible to just anyone. We deliberately built them flexibly so that they would cater to all sorts. So we've had young families, we've had couples, housemates, a creative agency, live-work community move in. Now there's the emergence of co-living. The shophouses we've developed fit really well into that.
Geylang it reminded me of when I was in Madrid, living near the flea market, all this mayhem and different nationalities, different religions. I felt quite at home.
I like Geylang because it's just a nostalgic place. It's like it holds back in time, which is a very unique place in Singapore.
我们最喜欢的牙龙就是去哪里都方便，吃也方便，吃好像都去到哪里都方便。
At the time, Geylang was mainly known for its red light district, food, basically mostly that. But when we took a walk around the neighborhood, we realized that there was so much more than that. There's old trades, on the street. There's the traditional Chinese medicine shop, for example. You've also got lots of temples, a lot of built heritage that have actually been untouched because they're located in the red light district. And so people have stayed away from redeveloping it too much. And so we felt that if we did something special and gave people a reason to come to Geylang to explore it, that would be a way of raising awareness of the neighborhood in terms of it being more than just sex and food, but also architecture and history.
When I first mentioned to people that I was going to be moving to Geylang, there was a very apprehensive tone of, do you know where you're moving to? I think it's a real misconception of what Geylang has become. This area has such a neighborhood vibe. In the morning, if I step outside at all and the trash guys are going past, it's a good morning to you guys. Everyone is relatively friendly. I find that in condos, you don't get that. People kind of close the door and shut themselves off to the rest of what's happening in the building. Even though there's public amenities within that sort of space, you try and stay to yourself mostly, whereas this does have that communal concept to it as well.
We just witnessed the transformation that people are moving in. A lot of the dilapidated shop houses were improving very significantly in very pretty ways, I must say. So the more we have cultural, art, and so on activities going on in Geylang, our reputation would improve.
Through the 3 years during which we were doing this, I really just literally got to know the neighbors. This is unit number 7, and it's actually right smack in the middle of the project. It's been a family home for generations. They have always been in the TCM trade. I have really fond memories of this place because during the project, this would be my little haven of respite. So I'd come and visit like the auntie and her daughter. Yeah, and so it's really nice to come back and find that they're still here. Stuff like this really is very precious. That's the history of the street.
Co-living as a concept started, I think, it has its roots in student housing, in flat sharing, in these kind of hyper-urban cities where rent is otherwise quite expensive. Co-living in shop houses really is taking that concept and applying it to just this particular typology or this particular type of structure, the shop house.
Can we unlock a greater sense of community that starts from home? The key thing about shop houses is that they're actually pretty big. You have close to 4,000 square feet of space shared between 5 to 6 people. You're in the shop house, it's co-living, but it's not your adult dorm sense of co-living. With the shop houses, you actually have that amount of space for everyone to socialize in, or if you don't feel like it, you can go back to your room and there's enough space in your room for you to use it as a private retreat as well. Co-living in shop houses isn't anything new. The only difference there is that instead of 5 to 6 people, as we have now co-living in a shop house, you had 5 to 6 families living in that very same shop house. And now we are taking this modern take on what co-living means today.
I kind of got bored of living alone in a very antiseptic condo facility, so I was looking for something with more character, better aesthetics, a little bit of a community. I think the best experience was during the circuit breaker. It was so great to have housemates living together, you know, trying to make the best of an unfortunate situation. We'd work together in the common areas, so, you know, there'd be a sense of normalcy that people are also around. I mean, not actually go back to living alone again. So in that way, my perception or my idea of home has changed.
Now we are living in the shared economy. Everything is breaking down into a small units of economy and small unit of living. And this can be combined together quite nicely in the framework as flexible as a shop house. So I see this, the strength of this typology actually for accommodating the future is by the possibilities of this reprogramming and reconfiguring the same typology with a new lifestyle. But of course, there is a kind of memory, a kind of identity belong to this specific typology that needs to be kept for the future. So if you want to keep the authentic form of a building, you just make sure that any new additions or changing, it doesn't affect the integrity of the structure, of the architectural features of that buildings.
These buildings embody the individual and community stories of the people who live through it. That is its value. So to live in the place, you need to keep enough aspects unchanged so you know where you came from. But you also need to build on it because you're going somewhere. We are not living in a museum, and we shouldn't live in a museum. So that is why we always try to balance change in all areas, because we want to make sure that the present generation has enough of inheritance from the past, but also will create inheritance for the future.
The recent pandemic actually has changed the perceptions of users, of clients, but even architects, that probably the future we will demolish less, we will reuse more. The sky is the limit. That's why we have architects, we have designers, we have young people with new ideas. And then we have this framework that is quite open for innovations. So start from these principles of adaptive reuse, of recycling the old wisdom into new needs, to fit into new needs and to solve new problems.
Eating out is my family business for about 4 generations. People like my car toast and my coffee.
From Monday to Saturday, it is Chinatown. On a Sunday, where the temple is crowded, it becomes an Indian town. I want to build a Malay town. The 3 races will have to integrate.
My favorite part of the Keong area is the cultural exchange and the vibrancy that all the restaurants and bars in the neighborhood bring.
So you have your bars, old school coffee shop, you have your bakeries, you have zicha restaurants. There's really something for everyone.
Situated on the outskirts of Chinatown, Keong Road was within walking distance from Hei Yun Gai. 2- and 3-story shop houses influenced by Art Deco architectural style line both sides of the street on Keong Road. These pre-war shop houses were designed in a simple style with clean lines bearing minimal ornamentation, giving it a classic, timeless form. Together with the tall French windows, which had timber-louved shutters on the upper floors, the entire facade of these shophouses emitted an old-world charm of the early 1900s. My grandmother is a mate. She came from China during the 1930s. I think you would call them the first generation of amas, where they are the ones that would probably be employed into private residences to take care of household chores. My grandmother was running an entertainment house that eventually evolved to become a brothel. I don't tell people I live in Keong Saik. I didn't. It was interesting because it's one of those things that it's almost like family shame. We don't talk about it. When I hit puberty at the age of about 11, 12 years old, I started noticing, men loitering around. I started seeing ladies dressed in very pretty dresses. And with all the hushed conversations that, adults were having, I started realizing that there was something going on. And I think that became my realization of what Keong Saik was.
Keong Saik has a very colourful history, as we all know, but I like Keong Saik because it's so condensed, the old and the new Singapore as well. Along the same street, you have the old establishments, but likewise you have the new Michelin star restaurants that represents the cosmopolitan nature of how Singapore is developed. And along the same street, you have the Indian temple and then the Chinese temple as well. You get the flavour of both Singapore, whether it's evolved or whether it's the former days. And I really love the sense of heritage, the sense of modernity as well within shophouses. When we first came in, it was the old Chinatown hotel that was refurbished around the late 1990s. So when we first came, it was really in a state of a very original condition. It was well kept, it was a very classy hotel, but you can feel that it's within a time capsule. Everything is frozen, and you just like that. I mean, I personally, I like that challenge to be able to come in to say, this is a nice spot, this is on a hill elevated ground. Let's do something to repurpose the place, to give it a new life. I think to me that is something that's very satisfying.
The initial brief was they wanted a boutique hotel, of course, and it must be something that's totally different, something more refreshing, and also the consideration of how do we make full use of tight spaces.
Shophouses are very modular. They tend to be quite long and narrow. I mean, the economies of scale can come in if you can merge various shophouses, but of course, if it's conserved, you're not allowed to tear down the intermediate walls.
We have to respond to the different requirements of trying to bring daylight into every room as much as possible. For the rooms that are in contact with the exterior facade, there's certain URA conservation guidelines that we have to respect. So you have to start forming little kinks and spaces. And how we deal with those kinks, it becomes a space for a study desk or even a little pantry space that you can look out over the conservation windows. For some of the rooms that's not in contact with the exterior facade, one of the strategies that we use is to introduce skylight into the space. In fact, on the second floor, we have this open space where the guests can use it as a communal area.
We have 45 unique rooms with 45 different layouts. There's also an opportunity whereby guests are encouraged to come back again because they can try out different rooms, different angles, and different types of surroundings. We engage two local artists. One of them is Tricia Liao. She's a digital artist. The brief to her is essentially create images that kind of blends modern society with the urban jungle. She did that through digital manipulated photographs and composites, and that is being represented on our art murals. The other artist that we engaged was Danielle Tay. She did for us a 30 meters high hand-painted wall mural, and that is actually within our lift shaft. And there's a glass lift. The artwork is about different stages of the jungle. Quite a mesmerizing artistic journey when the moment the guest steps into our hotel.
I like that it's like very artistic themed. You know, there are people who like paint on the walls here. It's really different from my other staycation experiences. Brings back a bit of olden day vibes, but revamped with something modern and contemporary.
Every part of the space is also bespoke. Every corner you turn, there's a surprise waiting for our target audience. The millennials, they are a very spontaneous bunch. They like Instagram. Essentially, their lifestyles evolves around social media as well. So we want to give them that avenue to kind of put things together and to put it onto their lifestyles and put it on their social media. I think essentially it becomes a very technologically driven, but how do you make the tangible, such as a shop house and a space, to be able to be amplified on their digital platform?
When we were designing this cafe, we wanted to bring together all elements to interpret it in a more modern way. The selection of materials was intentionally things like terrazzo finishes, even for the table, even rattan finishes for the furniture. They come together to become some sort of a fusion of the past and the present.
These buildings, they're sort of like a remnant of the past, just remind you how things used to be. They don't really make buildings like that anymore. So I think it's beautiful that they are repurposed and still kept around so that, you know, still keep a little bit of old Singapore alive.
The real estate game is not just about having places and then you just lease them out or you just sell them. You need to be able to come up with a concept, a certain lifestyle that attracts people to come into the place. And I think we have a right conduit. We have the shop house. Right now is how do you breathe life into the shop house and how do you attract the next generation to come in and to be able to fulfill, you know, their ambitions, their aspirations or ideals within the shop house.
The typical transformation of shop houses in Singapore, especially recently, is so-called gentrifications. It lost the original use as a house, as a dwelling space, but it's been changed to cafe, to bar, even boutique hotels, offices, because of this movement of population.
The building we're currently in is number 1 Keong Siak. 1 Keong Siak consists of 5 amalgamated shop houses built circa 1920s. It's a good example of how a neighborhood can evolve with the times in a way that is relevant. I love the combination of the old and the new. I think it's a resilient and real community and neighborhood.
The broad offer of Keong Siak with institutional local eateries here since 20-30 years and this brand new international restaurant makes a unique place. That's why everybody loves to come to Keong Siak.
I think it's great, you know, to have seen Keong Siak transform over the years. The transformation brought with it renewal, newness. That keeps the whole place alive in a sense that when people are coming in and, you know, we're still able to tell stories about the place, that allows a discovery as well of what the place is.
Shophouses have lent a unique flavor to many neighborhoods across Singapore, including Keong. Perhaps because of just the visual attractiveness that they present to the viewer. There's so much detail. There's always something to see on each building, because each building, depending on who designed it, who built it, who lived in it, had a certain manifestation. So you can tell this is a house of this clan or that community. Right? Coming together, they form a wonderful aesthetic ensemble. For a lot of people, they assume that conservation is just for the facade. But the true spirit of conservation is beyond facade. It's about understanding what's important about a building and managing change such that whatever's important is sustained in the future, while change allows it to take on new value.
As long as you have a permanent people who stay in relatively long period of time in the neighborhood, then you have the sense of neighborliness. And when you have this sense of neighborliness, you have a neighborhood and you have a community.
Chiat is the iconic neighborhood that's a microcosm of what Singapore is about, of the communities that's here: Malay, Chinese, Peranakan Chinese, Eurasian, Indian.
The food here never changed. Our childhood memory is here. My customer move out of here from Chiat, but they still remember here because of the food.
My favorite part of Chiat would be the wet markets. They are the places where you can get the widest choice of ingredients, all kinds of herbs that you will need for your Peranakan cooking.
My favorite part of Chiat is the temple because of the number of people who come here whom I can meet and greet.
I like Chiat is because it's been my home for 20 over years. It's not superly crowded, but yet crowded enough and bustling enough, giving some vibes which everybody feels comfortable.
The whole of the Chiat, it has a very unique environment that is different than what you're gonna experience in the more central zones like Chinatown, Emerald Hill, or Ken Hill. This has a very Peranakan heritage, and with that it comes a lot of different details. I mean, the Peranakan culture was full of detailing coming from that melting pot of cultures, right? So you have the very rich color tonalities, the very rich decorations that are not only in terms of a paint job, but are also in very intricate details that were happening in the facades. And the beauty of it is that the neighborhood is still very much habited by the Peranakan families, right? So you get a lot of fantastic Peranakan food, Chinese, Malay food. That melting pot is still here, and that is very interesting, and it's very nice to be part of a team of consultants that is still keeping that heritage alive.
My passion with shophouses started out actually when I was in my younger days. And I was always curious about how the design of the house and how it looks so different, you know, when it was built. I've been seeing houses like this around town and everywhere, and I find that this is quite a unique piece of architecture, and it's just about the finest Peranakan design I've ever seen. I could see that the previous owner were along the years trying to modernize the house, but what they have done is really sort of destroyed the original look of the house. So my brief to the architect was very straightforward. Do whatever you can to restore the house to the original state.
One of the elements that was very interesting of the whole restoration process was all of the windows and the facade motifs. So if you look, we have French windows, we have the transom, which is all of those floral elements on top of the windows. They have floral motifs, more from a Republican era, which you don't see them in many of the houses in Singapore. So we had some original ones, therefore we could replicate them and recreate the ones that were missing. In addition, we had to recreate all of the timber doors and windows and screens for the lower level because they were non-existent.
This house here is interesting in the sense that it is custom-made and the design is neoclassical setting of the Chinese with craftsmanship of the Italian. These tiles are known as encaustic tiles. So this is custom-made and commissioned. In the olden days, shop houses usually carry with the ornaments that suggest the status of the owner. You can see that in the motif, you can see that in the frescoes, you can see that in all the kind of moldings also. So when you look at this house, it has got the majestic and looking command of view on the side of the balcony, but yet he settled it with floral patterns on the side. It suggests that this owner is mindful about his status, that he should not shout about it. This majestic balcony versus the subtlety of the motif that brings it a very well-balanced home.
There is a challenge to restore or to keep the old ornaments and old materials within the interior of the buildings. The first challenge, of course, is the authenticity. How you can find the same building material, the same craftsmanships to be able to restore following the original materials and techniques they used in the past. The second challenge, of course, is to adopt into the present building regulations about the fire safety, universal accessibility, how to fit in equipments like air conditioning, like the electrical rewiring, and so on. The third, I think, most serious challenge is to make it relevant to most people on these generations. It's about lifestyle. If you used to live in the condominiums, in the modern housing estate or SDB typology, and how can you reconnect with that kind of space? So if you take a look into these lucky shop house examples that won the UNESCO Asia Pacific Award for Heritage Conservations, for innovations, you can see the whole range of possibilities has been implemented into that specific unit. You have an original, authentic look of the facade of the front house. But once you enter the house, you see some changes, like stripping off all the plasters and the insertions of the steel structure at the middle, the removal of the upper floor that switch into the present condition, but at the same time also maintaining the material authenticity of the inner wall. And then you move beyond the courtyard, you can find a new utilitarian, modern, very contemporary minimalist box that fits very well into the needs of that family. But because that unit was built on the empty plot at the back, it doesn't really destroy anything. So conservation means able to adapt into the new needs with less demolitions, a lot of recycling, an ability to keep the original features and original elements of the typology itself.
It's stunning when you see it from outside, but when you came in, it was a warehouse. It was dark, there was no light, there was no ventilation. It was a convenience store, right? So basically they had roller shutters, they would bring it up, sell stuff, close it down, and that was it. So the whole ground level required a new facade. It's like facelift in full. When someone decides to buy a shop house or a conservation building or a heritage building, you need to have a special character. You need to appreciate history, appreciate art, appreciate heritage. In a place like Singapore that everything is moving so fast, I learned a lot about the culture just by going through a shop house experience.
We took full advantage of having a courtyard in this house. That's how the original house is being designed. That brings in a lot of lights and make it area. I had the idea of making the courtyard into like a Japanese Zen kind of a garden design. So I brought in the Japanese bonsai, and that gives me a sense of tranquility and calmness as I go about trimming the trees or caring for the trees and enjoying how the trees actually blossoms and grow.
The idea is really to take the front part of the private property, about 1.5 meters, as a covered walkway for public, which is not very well accepted by the populations. So you can imagine if you sleep at the upper floor in your sleeping room, that people now can walk under your bed, not on the street. If you sit in the living room, then you can see someone, a stranger, peeking into your windows, and that creates inconveniences.
One of our biggest concerns is quite open to the public. So beyond the house, you're very close to the traffic. What we get actually is a lot of wedding couples taking photography outside the house. They love this backdrop of the house and the features on the external sides. Having stayed here for 5 over years now, we are just kind of get used to it. We think that all this activity is part of the fabric of the neighborhood. Preserving the conservation house like this is really to showcase the past and allowing the future generations to understand and appreciate how we have evolved from those days to the modern settings nowadays. That past will never go away. My idea of a home is certainly having a warm family to be with. This house draws people and brings people together to have a very nice piece of conversations. It's a piece of art itself.
It's kind of come full circle. Now shop houses are desirable because they are limited in supply. They're limited in supply, the heritage status attached to it, so there's some element of cool and prestige. And I think people are also interested in living in meaningful spaces.
Whether it's the Singaporeans or our foreign friends, they can relate to that, hey, it's part of this space. Singaporeans used to live, grow their families. They used to have commercial activities. They used to earn their living and make their money. And I think that should be remembered and should be carried on, in whatever shape or form. But as long as that structure as a shophouse, the architectural form stays, it's up to generations to think about how do you evolve within that framework.